Well, I decided to run for Congress because I think we've reached a very unique point in our nation's history. Never before has America faced the type of challenges that we're facing. I think they cross party lines. I think it's important that now more than ever we're able to send people to Washington who offer a very practical and pragmatic approach to solving these, frankly, monumental problems. Some of those would be the fact that this is the worst recovery on record. That's not hyperbole. Unfortunately, that's just truth. Our debt is larger than our entire economy. I think that's problematic for a number of reasons. Number one, the next generation, they're going to be forced with having to pay back this massive amount of debt. But more so, it threatens our economic security. And I think that's incredibly important given the fact that middle-class families are struggling now more than ever. And when you consider in the state of Arizona, roughly 80,000 kids K through 12 attend underperforming schools. Hear me, that is not a criticism on teachers. But that is, in fact, a realization that I think we need education reform. I believe in universal school choice. What does that do? Well, I think that we need to empower teachers, we need to empower parents, and we need to empower students. I think there's going to be great innovations in education, and the next generation, whether that's public schools or charter schools, online platforms or home-based platforms. And so I think when you empower parents with choice and students, everybody wins. So there's a number of problems when you consider also the value of the dollar is being diminished. What does that do, and what has caused that? Well, when we continue to spend more than we bring in every single year and just print the difference, that hurts middle-class families, Arizonans. I think that the backbone of our economy, middle-class Arizonans, it's harder and harder for them to put food on the table, to provide for their families, to squirrel some away for retirement or to be able to pay for college education. The costs for these things are going up every single year, going in the wrong direction. And again, this is a bipartisan problem. So I'm of the thought that the next generation of leaders who step forward, hopefully I'm in that category, is able to come to the table, have a conversation and say, okay, how are we going to approach these issues and solve these problems? Because at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's not about anybody in office. It's about the families that we represent, period. This is encouraging. I believe that people are getting tired of living in bad weather cities and they want to come to a place like Phoenix, the Valley here in Arizona, and expand. Frankly, we need to embrace pro-growth policies that will allow businesses to expand, that will they'll be able to identify Arizona as a place they want to move and create thousands of jobs. We're seeing that already. I think we're going to see that in the coming generations. But more than anything, I think we have to realize that just in Maricopa County and in my district, roughly 85% of all businesses are considered small businesses. These are folks with less than 100 employees. They're the backbone of our entire economy, certainly in the state. I view that as a good thing, as a great thing. When I consider my job, my role in Washington, I think it's to make their job easier, to allow them to be able to produce, do what they do best, And so how does that happen? What does that look like? Well, first of all, it's siding with them. When you ever faced with a decision and you can side with Wall Street or Main Street, I will always be on the side of Main Street. As a conservative, as somebody who believes in free market principles, that's where I should always stand. That's where I will always stand. And so I view it as three legs to a stool. How do we grow the economy and advance economic freedom? This is not the direction we're going now. And so what does it consist of? Well, three things. One, spending reform. Two, regulation reform. And three, tax reform. Let's start with taxes. It's been proven bipartisan across party lines. Again, a part of my pragmatic approach. Whether it was Kennedy, Reagan, Clinton in '98, and or George W. Bush in early 2000s, when you cut taxes, you leave people with more of what they rightly earned. It grows our economy. And what happens when that happens? Well, revenues into the federal government actually increase. So it actually kills two birds with one stone. And regulatory reform. Whenever you want to make something more scarce, you make it harder to produce it. And so I'm of the ilk that the best way to create jobs and production is to make it easier, and that's by streamlining regulation. We can sunset regulations that negatively impact the economy by $100 million or more every year, and that's something that the CBO can score. And that's one example of regulatory reform. And we need to balance our budget. And so spending reform is absolutely a critical part of this. That's why I believe and I support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. So those are three very tangible ways that we can help small business owners. But more than that, it's about the workers, right? I mean, it's about the middle-class Arizona families who work at those small businesses, which again, that's 80 to 85% of the employees in the state. Yeah, I'm a firm believer that we need standards. My background playing competitive athletics, quarterback at ASU, and moving on into the NFL, and then being fired. It's a very competitive industry, and there are standards. And so I think every kid deserves to be challenged. Every student needs to be challenged. It's no different than us in our everyday lives. You know, when there's a challenge presented at any point in American history, we have always risen to the occasion. And so I'm a firm believer in those standards, but I think they need to be decided locally. I think they need to be decided at the state level, but even more so at the school district level. But I would even argue even more so with parents. That's why I said before, education reform for me is all about empowering parents and students and teachers. What we have now, I think, certainly in public schools, we have a system where teachers have to spend 30-40% of their time complying with somebody looking over their shoulder and telling them what they have to do. Well, that's 30-40% of the time where they're not able to spend with the kids. And ultimately, this is about the kids. And so if you have standards whereby teachers are able to know ahead of time what is expected of them, but then parents are involved in the process, and then the students are able to come in every day and know that there are going to be very lofty goals that you're going to have to reach. That's a beautiful thing. You know, our economy is so driven on technology and innovation and entrepreneurship, and certainly here in our community. And so it's absolutely irresponsible to continue to send kids to underperforming or failing schools. Given that fact, it's one of the best ways to bootstrap your way up in society. I'm a product of a good education. Wildcat fans might argue Arizona State's not a good education, but I have 2 degrees from there, and so I would obviously debate the point. But the point is that a quality education is the best way for anybody to empower themselves in our country, in our economy, and to pull themselves up. And ultimately, any parent, they just want their child to be self-sufficient, reliant, and able to provide for themselves and then start their own family and move forward. And so that's what we can do if we have standards in classrooms, but those standards need to come as local and granular as we can. What I would say is the Tempe Union override vote that just took place. Dick Foreman ran that. He's a good friend of mine and supporter. That was not a tax increase, and I supported it because it was not a tax increase. I don't live in the district. I was not able to vote on that. But I was supportive of that because it was a local solution to the situation of education funding. I think that's a great thing. So from a federal perspective and how I would approach this in Washington, I think that the first step would be to reform the Department of Education, to restrict the scope of the Department of Education to Title I and special needs kids. Then what you do is you block grant funding to the states, you localize decision making, you increase efficiency, and you're able to, again, empower the decision makers, including parents and students. And so regarding any of these very difficult budgetary issues, I think that's a great way to introduce some efficiencies into the system and also empower local lawmakers and school districts. So from my standpoint, this is the decision that needs to take place in the state. I'm a strong supporter of that. Looking even at the next level in college, We have a situation now, again, I spoke about my 2 degrees from Arizona State. I have some loans for the second one, and the cost for college is becoming increasingly prohibitive. And when I talk to my wife about what we may do in, I don't know, 18, 20 or so odd years, if we're able to have children, the cost for college is becoming almost prohibitive, where you are better off maybe waiting. And that's unfortunate, and I don't think that has to be the case. So I think really if you take a dual approach to this for K through 12 and you're able to block grant funding to the states and let them make the decisions for their unique situations, that's a step in the right direction. Then we also have to address what happens for college and the cost for college. And since 2008, my understanding is that the cost for college in the state of Arizona has almost doubled. That is not sustainable any way you look at it. And we have a situation now with a lot of students leaving school. Economists have actually dubbed this generation of folks who have graduated college and they're sort of in limbo, but they have student loans, as the lost generation. That to me is tragic. That's heartbreaking. And so we cannot forget about those students who are in that position and graduates who are in that position. It's part of the reason why we need a robust economy. But so it's twofold for me, and addressing the skyrocketing costs every year of college is a big part of this for me. The VA situation, let me first say that it is absolutely deplorable. I find it's disgusting. Sometimes people are hesitant to use strong language in politics. This is a situation we should not shy away from. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and there needs to be light shine very brightly on this situation. For me, it's if we can't take care of our veterans as a society, the folks who put their hand in the air, volunteered, or were drafted, if we can't do right by them, we have serious problems. We don't have the ability to even sit here and meet if it wasn't for the veterans and folks who came before them and served and allowed us the opportunity to be able to live in a free society. And so I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us to take the first step, which is a voucher system, which is if you're standing in line and you've been waiting in line and you're unable to get treatment, then you should have the ability to take your VA card, as it is, nothing new, and go to a private physician, private practice, and get treatment. And that's the bare minimum we can do. I think there also has to be a significant overhaul of the VA. Thankfully, there is some light being shined on the situation, but there needs to be steps taken. It can't end there. It's not enough. It cannot end there. So I believe the system in and of itself, the socialized system, that's how Paul Krugman of the New York Times describes it. It's not my description. A single-payer system isn't compassionate. I believe it's actually inhumane, because it provides for perverse incentives. 2 sets of books, one that's legitimate, one that's not, so that our bosses, our authorities can see the illegitimate set of books. Also, it treats people like cogs in a system, as opposed to human beings. We're human beings. We're not units, we're not cogs. And so I think it's barbaric to have a system by which humans are not treated as humans. And so my concern is that the future of America's healthcare system under the current regime is the VA. And we have somebody sitting in office right now, Kyrsten Sinema, who co-signed a letter that she delivered to Kathleen Sebelius that advocated for single payer, a VA-style healthcare system. Again, that's not compassionate. Clearly, it is inhumane, and so it is a very serious issue that needs to be addressed appropriately, immediately, but it cannot end with just shining light on the situation. We need to recognize what's happening all around us with the VA, and even more so with, or equally with Obamacare. Well, I decided to run for office because I think we need to empower families. We need to empower workers. We need to empower the least of these. What does that look like? Well, I think of a story that my grandmother told me when I was 10 years old. She grew up in Oklahoma in the Great Depression, dirt poor, didn't even have running water in her house. That's a world that I don't even know, I don't recognize. And in the teeth of the Great Depression, she came home from school one day with an orange. She walked through the door, her dad seated. He asked, "Where'd you get it?" So she said, the teacher, his very next question, did you do any work to earn it? She said no. So he made her march all the way back to school in order to do some work for the teacher and earn the orange. Such a simple and yet profound illustration of what I think there is something inherently noble and virtuous and good when we put our hands to work and earn our rewards. I don't believe that's anything that, it's not something that anybody can do for us. Certainly my background playing competitive athletics and quarterback, I would have loved to pay somebody to be able to lift weights for me or run sprints for me or watch film for me, and I could just show up on game day. But we know that's not reality, and we know that's not the real world. And so I think that we have a dignity and a value as human beings that is realized when we develop our unique God-given abilities. And so my campaign is all about empowering people through employment. Ronald Reagan said the best social program is a job, and I believe that. And so when I think about, am I doing a good job, I think of the average middle-class family. And today, the scenario is this. I think it's harder for the average middle-class family to provide for their kids, to pay for college, to put food on the table, put gas in the car, or to pay for health care. These things shouldn't be so. And I am convinced they don't have to be. So if elected, I will go to Washington and fight for the folks that I think have the largest special interest, and that's the American people. That's Arizonans, and that should be our focus. It's certainly my focus. So how do we do that? We advance economic freedom. That is what my campaign is all about, advancing a system by which folks can go out and pursue their happiness. And so my campaign is going well, and I would ask you to please join our team. I need you on my team, and I know that we can win. This is a great year for us, and folks that believe in the values and the principles that I stand for.